Hello, I'm Jeff Powers, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports, and welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show, joined by Logan Glaser of RealTime Fantasy Sports once again. Logan, thanks so much for coming on as always.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Logan, it's week 15, time to preview all the games, and this week we are going to give you our playoff winners. So these are guys that we think could make a difference in your fantasy playoffs, could be players that are maybe sleepers, guys that are superstars. Either way, we think they're going to be difference makers this week and help fantasy teams win their playoff games. Most of you are starting your playoffs this week, Logan, in a lot of leagues, or it's the last week of the regular season, depending on your format. But either way, it's a really, really crucial week of games.
Yes, it's a huge week of games, as you mentioned. I would say probably 80% of our leagues in RT Sports are starting their playoffs this week. Majority have that 6 teams make the playoffs, top two get a bye with that. And then also we got our TFFC and TFC playoffs. It's the championship week for TFC, along with that overall championship starting. So be giving away $500,000 in 3 weeks. So
Yeah,
that's exciting.
it is exciting. $500,000, just a great contest, the fantasy championship. Kind of talked about it last week. We have that awesome leaderboard where you can keep track of everything once those playoffs get in the overall. Just a lot of fun to watch, see where you stand. And kudos to everybody in that contest. If you just qualify for the big overall prize, it's a feat because it's a lot of great competition and it's a great contest. So congratulations to you if you are advancing on in the fantasy championship, and good luck this last week. Like you said, it's the last week of the season for you to qualify, correct?
So the championship starts this week, but also the individual championship is
Oh,
this
okay.
week. So it's a double week for those people in the championship. So lots to play for. $1,000 for if you win your individual league, but then you're also going for that overall prize as well with it. So
And like you said, overall prize $500,000 this year. So don't forget about that contest next year if you've never played it. It's just a lot of fun. The fantasy championship. Go to rtsports.com and click on that money league link and see all the different offerings we have on there. And also this year, our postseason shootout. You can start signing up for that as well right now if you want. The prize on that, Logan, what is that this year?
yeah, that's 100,000 for first place with that. So the max of 2,500 entries in that contest, but the top 200 places will win at least $200. So lots of money to be won on there as well, and that's a very strategic game.
It
It
is.
differs a lot from like a season-long contest, just because you need your players to get far into the playoffs. It's just mixing and matching who's going to produce the best in the playoffs, along with their team advancing.
And you can only pick so many from each team as well, correct?
Correct. 2 players per team is the max, so you can't just load up on 49ers
Yeah.
players, if you think they're gonna go win it all. So the max is you can do with 2 with that, so a lot of strategy involved with that,
Yeah, that's a
so
fun contest. I love that one. Your
sure.
fantasy season does not have to end when this regular season ends for sure. So I highly suggest checking that out as well. So if you want to do any of that, go to rtsports.com. You can see everything we have to offer on there. But Logan, let's get to these games. There's a ton of them this week. No more buys. We're in week 15. As always, we're going to go through every game on the slate. We're going to talk about it briefly, give you our favorite playoff winner for that game. And if you have any questions as well, feel free to put them in the chat. We're more than happy to answer them. Always get a lot of good interaction with the viewers out there. So it's a lot of fun to hear from you, what you have to say as well. So feel free to put anything in the chat if you have any questions, comments, whatever. We're happy to take a look. All right, Logan. First game is a Thursday night game tonight. Chargers 5-8, the Raiders 5-8. Not a good game, unfortunately. A lot of injuries in this one. 2 backup quarterbacks starting. The over-under's 34.5. Thought it might be lower after last week with the Raiders 3-0 loss. Raiders are actually -3, so they're favored in this game. What do you think's going to happen here, and who's your play?
Yeah, as you mentioned, there are lots of injuries in this game. For the Chargers, they got Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen out. For the Raiders, it's looking like Josh Jacobs is going to be out tonight. It's not official on that yet, but it's leaning towards that way. I think I'm still going with the Raiders. It's just so hard for me to trust that Chargers offense. They were struggling to move the ball even with Herbert,
You're right.
but
Yep.
now Herbert's out of the picture, along with their number one wide receiver, who is probably their only decent wide receiver in that fact that they're going to be relying heavy on Austin Eckler tonight. Um, but I still got the Raiders at home.
What about the over under that 34.5?
It's just so low, especially in a great weather with their stadium, with the dome, with that, and with Las Vegas with that. So it's I think I'm gonna go over.
All
It's
right.
it's hard for me to do that, but I think that with that low total, I'm gonna go with the
What
over.
about your playoff winner in this one?
Play I'm gonna go with is a defense, and that's gonna be Las Vegas's defense. With
I
that,
like
again,
it.
as I mentioned, no Justin Herbert, no Keenan Allen. Last week they were in a 3-0 game. The Raiders defense with that, they had 5 sacks. Again, with Easton Stick at quarterback, I like as a defense in this game, so I picked up Vegas defense in quite a few leagues as they're only 10% owned on RT Sports. So I'm going to be starting them in most of my leagues this week.
That's a good move. I like that. I guess I'll go with the over. It's a really low number, but
It
I
is.
think they can score some
It's
points.
tricky with that.
Yeah, Aiden O'Connell hasn't played either. There's rumblings that Jimmy Garoppolo could be inserted as a starter sooner than later. So that offense is kind of struggling. Devontae Adams is sick as well. I think he'll play. It's an illness, but who knows what he's dealing with. Either way, there's a lot of star players missing. So I think it's Austin Eckler show tonight. He's going to get so much work as a receiver, as a runner. I think he's just going to have a monster game. And it hasn't really happened a lot this season, which is kind of surprising with Eckler. But I think tonight's a night that he has a monster game, even with a backup QB. Those backups don't like to take chances down the field. They like to use the tight end, the running back. So I think Eckler gets a huge workload. I like him for a lot of points. Raiders also allow the 6th most fantasy points of running backs this year. So that really bodes well for him. We have our first question in the chat, and it's a QB1: Mullins, Ritter, or Tommy Cutlets. I mean, that's some slim pickings there, unfortunately, Ryan. I hate to see that. Obviously, you had a guy get hurt, so you're having to dig deep to try to find somebody to pick up here. I think they all have their question marks, pluses and minuses. Who do you lean towards here?
Yeah, I'm definitely. I think I'm between Mullins and Ritter just because of matchup purposes. So you got going up against either Carolina or Cincinnati with that. I think both of them are decent matchups with that. I think I would lean towards Mullins if I had to choose one, but I can't fault going Ritter just because he has more game experiences. Also, he gets it done on the ground as well. So he actually is a decent fantasy quarterback. If you look at his recent games with that. So it wouldn't fault me to going with Ritter. Last week he had 29 fantasy points against Tampa Bay, and then this week is against Carolina. So I might actually go Ritter.
It's a close call. I think Ritter is the safe play because of his rushing total. Like you mentioned, he'll get some rushing yards, but I don't think he's very exciting. I think if you want to go for the guy who's more capable of the big game, I'd go with Mullins in Cincinnati. Could be playing from behind in that game as well. He gets Justin Jefferson for a full game. Also, he's supposedly healthy, said he's not going to have any limitations. So I think Mullins has better weapons, a better chance for the big game. So I probably lean him. Ritter's probably the safer of the two, the higher floor, but I think Mullins has a higher ceiling. So I go him most likely. All right, next game. We're just talking about him actually, and that's Nick Mullins. It's the Vikings 7-6 at the Bengals 7-6. Actually, a lot of playoff implications on the line here. 40.5 for the over under, -3. The Bengals are -3 at home, and there are 3 Saturday games this week. So keep that in mind when setting your lineups. This is the first of the Saturday games. All of them look pretty good as well. We kind of talking about that before we came on, Logan, but your thoughts on this game? You think the Bengals
Yeah,
get it done at
so
home?
looking at these games, the first 3 games, it's all backup quarterbacks, and the first 6 teams, all backup quarterbacks, playing with that. Spreads within 3 on each of them too as well. But I think this is actually gonna be a really good game, Minnesota at Cincinnati. I think, especially with Justin Jefferson, playing, I do think Minnesota does keep this close, with that aspect. So I think I actually might go Minnesota in a little bit of an
Okay.
upset. I do think that it would be an upset if Minnesota wins with the line -3 for Cincinnati. But I
Means
think
it's
I'm
a
gonna go
pick
with
'em
Mullins.
basically,
And
yeah.
on the other side, Cincinnati's wide receivers are a little bit banged up. Jamar Chase is dealing with a little bit of a injured ankle with that, and also Tyler Boyd is questionable. So my play is actually going to be T. Higgins. Um, I think just with those two wide receivers that are banged up, they're going to really rely on Higgins. Higgins had a decent fantasy week last week. He had 70+ yards against Indianapolis, and he's got a great matchup against Minnesota this week. So I'm going to go with Minnesota to win, and with T. Higgins as my play, though.
I think it's a close call. I could see Minnesota winning, but I'm going to go with the Bengals winning at home. I'll go with the under, too. I don't think there'll be a ton of points scored in this game, 40.5. And I actually like Ty Chandler a little bit with Minnesota. Alexander Madison has a bum ankle. He's not looking good to play. He hasn't practiced yet to start the week. I mean, Chandler could start. They have a backup QB, or I guess down to a third string QB with Nick Mullins. So as I mentioned, with the situation with the Chargers, they could use the running back a lot out of the backfield. So I think Chandler could get catches as well as carries. I like his floor. He's had a couple big games as well this year, can make the big play at times. And I think this matchup is decent against the Bengals, who are just so defensively. So I kind of like Ty Chandler here as long as Madison is out. All right, next Saturday game, like you said, another good one on the slate. Steelers 7-6 at the Colts 7-6. So another one, big playoff implications. And this is at Indianapolis, who's -1.5. So it kind of seems like the Steelers are almost favored in this one because they don't get that normal home cook in there with the line there. Usually it's -3 for the home team, and it's 42.5 as well. So you think the Steelers can come in and win there?
Yeah, this is a massive game as well, as you mentioned. I do think I'm going to go with the Steelers, even though they lost back-to-back games against Arizona and the Patriots. I do think that bye week will help them a little bit with that. So my player that I'm going to be going with is Mitch Trubisky. He had 23.5 fantasy points against New England, even though he isn't a great passer or anything like that for Steelers purposes, but he is a pretty good fantasy player just because of that rush yards. He had a rushing touchdown and 30+ rush yards last week. We've seen him as in that starting role, put up 20+ fantasy points, even though he doesn't play great for the Steelers. He's a good fantasy quarterback, and he's got a great matchup against Indianapolis in that dome.
So I think the Colts win at home. Again, this is a close one. This is a tough call. I do like the over too, though. I think there'll be some points in this game. Neither defense has played very well. Steelers have not been good against the pass this year. Colts have been leaky as well. Have allowed some big games. I'm with you. I'm kind of in on that Steelers passing game this week. I like George Pickens. I think he's due for a huge game. He's still getting the looks despite his numbers not being great. He has at least 4 catches, 3 of his last 4 games. He has 3 100-yard games this season. Colts are middle of the pack against the pass, and I think he's due for a big game, and I think it could come this week. All right, another question, Logan. JSN or Godwin? So Smith and the Jigba, obviously Godwin would be the easy call before this season, but he has kind of underachieved while JSN has been getting a lot more targets lately. What's your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with JSN for this. I think they just have not been using Godwin. As we mentioned a week or two ago, Godwin has really been frustrated with his use in that offense. So I think I'm going to be staying away from Godwin and just go with JSN, who's been getting tons of targets.
Yeah, and Godwin mispracticed Wednesday with a knee injury, which is a little bit of a concern. It was kind of one of those deals where they might have been resting him more than anything. So he has some concerns. I think Smith and the Jigba has been getting a lot more looks lately, 18 targets the last 2 games. I think it's a close call. I really think it's a coin flip between these two. I actually might lean Godwin, even though his usage hasn't been great. I just think he has less to compete with for targets. So I might lean him. It's a close call, though. I think you can make a case for either guy at this point. All right, next game, last one on the Saturday slate, Logan. Broncos 7-6 at the Lions 9-4. So Lions have been struggling a little bit lately. Jared Goff has not played very well the last few weeks, in my opinion. That's kind of been the issue with them. They're -4 at home. Over under is 47.5. So pretty big number there. Thoughts on the game?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Detroit has really been struggling defensively and offensively, both sides of the ball. I think they've been struggling. As you mentioned, Jared Goff has really struggled with turnovers. with that aspect. But I do think they get it back and rebound this week at home. I do like them to cover that -4 line. I do think it goes over as well with that 47.5. And a player that I'm really expecting to bounce back is Amon-Ra St. Brown. So he's going to be my player that I'm going to go with in this game. He only has 5 total receptions in the last 2 games. He's been getting tons of targets, but just hasn't been. Some of the passes have been bad, some have been drops. So I really expect him to rebound. I think they're really going to rely on him to get that passing game going again.
I agree with you, Logan. I go with the Lions to cover at home. I think it'll be over. And I think they're going to lean on the running game a lot this week with Jared Goff kind of struggling a little bit. I do think Amon-Ra St. Brown has a good game. I agree with you there. But I think David Montgomery is a really good play. He's hit double-digit fantasy points 5 straight games. I know Jahmyr Gibbs is there and getting a lot of the work as well. But both these guys are really good, viable fantasy options. And I never thought I would say this, but I'm good with playing both of them. If you have them both on your roster and they're your fantasy backs, I go with them. I think they're going to have good games, both of them. I think Montgomery has a really good game again this week, though. Denver struggles against a run. They allow the most fantasy points to running backs, so I think they're going to lean on the run in this matchup. Montgomery really produces big, and I think he's going to have a really great game, maybe find the end zone a couple times. All right, another question, tight end one, Logan. Would you start Kincaid or McBride in a full PPR league? That's a close one.
It is. I think I'm going to go with McBride, though, just because Dawson Knox is also back in that Buffalo offense, which he didn't get involved that much last week, but still he's there and he'll be a little bit impactful. But Trey McBride last week, he had 23 fantasy points, week before 13, 9, 21, 25 the week before that. So, I mean, he's got a couple of 20-plus fantasy points. It's not a great matchup for them against San Francisco. I think they get blown out by them, but still, I'm going to go with McBride in that.
Game script matters, Logan, and they're
It
going to be
does.
playing
So, I mean, they
behind.
will be passing a lot, which is
Yep.
helpful for him, but
Exactly, and that's why I go with McBride too. I think he's going to get a ton of targets. He's the top pass catcher for Kyler Murray. Looks his way often, at least 9 targets, 3 of his last 4 games. He's been really good. I think both are good plays, so I'm okay with using either of them, but I think McBride has the higher ceiling, so I lean him. I think he's going to have a really good game once again as they try to play catch up. All right, first game on Sunday, Logan. Excuse me. Falcons 6-7 at the Panthers 1-12. It's an exciting game. The Falcons are still fighting for a playoff spot. They're 34 for the over-under, low-scoring game, +3 for the Panthers at home. So they're favored to lose. Do you like the Falcons to win this game?
yeah, I'm going to go with the Falcons. This is also a must-win game, I think, for them to have any shot of making the playoffs. With that, you have to take advantage of when you play Carolina with them only having 1 win. So I expect them to get the win. I would probably lean towards them winning between 3 to 7 points. So I would take that -3. With that guy, I'm going to be looking at is going to be Kyle Pitts in this matchup. He has 14 total targets in the last 2 games, which is great for him by his standards with that 50-plus yards in both of those games, and also had a touchdown last week. So they have been using him a little bit more in the last couple of weeks. So that's encouraging, and has a good matchup this week.
Yeah, for sure. He has been playing a little bit better finally. Thank God for that. We can start to count on him a little more. I agree. I think the Falcons win on the road. I think they cover. The points, I might go the under there just because that offense is so bad in Carolina, and Falcons defense is not that bad. I know it's just 34, but still, Panthers just can't score right now. I'm avoiding everybody on their offense this week. Even Hubbard, he's been getting a lot of carries, but Falcons have been pretty good against the run most of the year, so I don't even trust him, I think.
Yeah.
I love Bijan Robinson personally this matchup. I know that's kind of a chalk play, but he has 19 plus fantasy points 2 of his last 3 games, at least 17 points 3 of 4. He's getting more work, especially in the passing game, which helps his floor. He has 11 receptions his last 3 games. Panthers have allowed the 4th most fantasy points of running backs as well, so I think Bijan's set up for a really big game in this one, and I'm looking for him to have a really strong finish to his rookie season and really help fantasy teams down the stretch. All right, next game, Logan. Bears 5-8 at the Browns 8-5. Bears playing a little better of late. The line on this one is 38.5 and -3 for the Browns. So your standard -3 for the home team, Bears 38.5 for the over under. You like the Browns to keep it going with Joe Flacco this week?
Yeah, I actually am going to be on the Bears this week. I think
Oh,
they
he's on
just
the
have
Bears.
they have a very healthy team, and they have looked great in the last couple of weeks, with that coming off that win against Detroit, with that as well. So I'm going to go on the Bears because, I mean, you get a fully healthy team on the Bears where Cleveland's struggling with a little bit of injuries. I know Joe Flacco had a really good game last week and had that offense moving, but I still am going to go with the Bears. Again, as you mentioned, the line is -3, so that means on neutral field, they would be a straight up
Yep.
because
Pick 'em.
usually the home side gets about 3 points. With that line implied. So on a neutral field, these two teams are straight up, but I am going to go with Chicago +3 as my pick on that. And guy I'm going to be going with is going to be Deontay Foreman. So last week for the Bears, we saw for the first time in a couple of weeks that all three running backs were healthy. We had Foreman, Rashawn Johnson, and Khalil Herbert all back, and Foreman dominated those carries with 11 carries, 2 receptions. He had over 70 yards with that, and I think that I do like over 38 as the total, so I want to go with Foreman as my play with that.
Yeah, Foreman played 55% of the snaps. I thought Rashawn Johnson might be the guy who ends up getting more work down the stretch, but they're still leaning on Foreman, and it showed last
Yeah,
week
I
for
thought the
sure.
same. Rashawn Johnson looked good in his limited amount of carries that he was getting, but it seems like they're
I
sticking with
started
Foreman.
I started Rashawn Johnson in one of my leagues last week. It really turned out well for me. Shows what I know there. Oh, well. So I agree with you on the over, but I'm going with the Browns.
Yeah.
I can't go with the Bears here on the road. Browns defense is still pretty good. They've been causing turnovers. Flacco has not been terrible by any means. So I'll say the Browns win. I go with the over. And my play is David Njoku. I think he has become a must start for fantasy teams. He's been so consistent all season, double-digit fantasy points, 7 of his last 8 games. He has at least 6 catches, 4 or 5 games as well. His floor is super high. Bears allow the 6th most fantasy points to tight end. So I think Njoku's moved into that must-start territory at tight end, which has been better this year for the most part, though. Fantasy tight ends have been better than they have been in recent seasons. It hasn't been just Travis Kelce and everybody else, which is
Oh,
nice to
yeah.
see.
Yeah, it is nice to see. I think we always talked about last year how disappointing tight ends were, and this year, complete opposite. The tight ends actually have been pretty good. And there's lots of leagues where you can actually see a tight end in a flex spot, and people are playing two
Yep,
tight ends.
for sure. I'm doing that in one of my leagues. I got Kittle and McBride going in
Yeah,
the flex spot. Why not go with McBride? I think he's been so good lately and get so many targets that I'm pulling the trigger there.
yeah.
All right, next game, Logan. Buccaneers 6-7 at the Packers 6-6. So we all thought the Packers were turning the corner. Jordan Loves looked great, but man, he played terrible last game. They're in a crucial game. Both these teams still in the playoff hunt. 41.5 for the over under. Packers are 6-7. I'm sorry, I said 6-6. And it's -3.5 for the Packers. So they are slightly favored there at home. You like the Packers to win this one at home over the Bucs.
I do. As you mentioned, this is another huge game. We have so many games that are just the spread is 3, and playoff implications are huge because there's so many teams right on that border where if they win, you're looking at making a playoff run. If you lose, you're looking on the outside. If you go 6-8, with that, is you might have to win out to just sneak in possibly. But I do like Green Bay at this game just because they're the home team with that. Player I'm going to be looking at though is Mike Evans. So Evans has been a top 10 wide receiver so far in the year, and he's had some huge games. Recently, he went 26, 15, 25, 29. But then last week, he only had 1 reception for 8 yards. So that was by far his worst game so far in the season, but I expect him to rebound in this must-win game for Tampa Bay. I am going to be selecting Green Bay, but I do think Evans has a bounce-back game from last week.
Yeah, I think Green Bay wins at home as well. It'll be a close game. I like the over. I think there'll be some points scored here. So I think that Packers win, get it done at home, and I like the over. And with all their injuries at receiver, they got a lot of guys banged up. I think Romeo Dobbs kind of the last man standing, so I think he could have a really big game this week. He hasn't been great this year, but he gets the most work out of any of those receivers. He's played at least 80% of the snaps 3 straight games. He had 4 receptions last week. He's hit that mark 3 of his last 4 games. So I think he does well against Tampa. They allow the 6th most fantasy points to receivers as well, 30th overall against the pass. So I think that passing game gets it going this week in Green Bay, and Romeo Doubs has a really big showing in that one. All right, next game, Jets 5-8 at the Dolphins 9-3. Jets starting to trend better lately. Won a big game last week. Zach Wilson seemed to give them a spark at QB. 37.5 for the over/under. Dolphins still a big favorite at home, -8.5. Do you think the Jets can cover that?
I think Miami wins, but Jets do cover that number. I think Tyreek Hill's injury is a little bit worse than what's kind of been noted. Also playing against a really good pass secondary with the Jets, so I do think Tyreek Hill kind of doesn't have his best game. Um, with not being as explosive as he is. I know he's in that hunt for 2,000 yards, so he's going to be trying to tough that out and try to have a big game. But I do think he gets shut down by that secondary without being as explosive. So my play is actually going to be Raheem Mostert. Just because I think they're going to rely a little bit more on the running game this week. Chain is also a little bit banged up, and Mostert, he's looked good the last couple of weeks. Last week he had 21 carries, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns. So they've really been relying on him inside the 10-yard line with that.
They look like a different team when Hill was off the field last week. I don't know if you watched that, but
Yeah, they sure
they
did.
struggled.
They struggled without
Yeah.
Hill.
So if he's not 100% or he doesn't play, which is possible as well, it could be a different game there. And I actually think the Jets cover as well. I think the Dolphins win, but the Jets cover that big number. That defense will keep them in the game. Mostert was actually the guy I was going to look at as my favorite play. I agree with you there. He's been so good. He's second overall in fantasy running back scoring, which is hard to believe. Jets
Yeah.
are second against the pass compared to 28th against the run, too. So I think he gets a big workload. I'll pivot, and I'll give you a different player to consider. That's Ty Conklin. I think they're playing from behind. Jets have to throw the ball a lot. His floor has been pretty good. He gets his weekly chances. He has at least 3 receptions, 3 straight games, and 5 of his last 6. So Conklin's a guy that kind of flies under the radar at that tight end position, but I think he could produce a good game in this matchup if they're playing from behind and having to throw the ball. All right, next game, Logan, the other New York team, Giants 5-8 at the Saints 6-7. Giants still somehow are in the playoff hunt. Even with Tommy Cutlets there as your QB, starting to look a little better. Over-under's 39.5, 39, I should say, for this one. Saints big favorite at home, though, -6. What do you think happens?
Yeah, I do think the line is a little bit high, but I still like the Saints. With that, so the line at 6 is what it was when they were at home against Carolina, and now it's against the Giants, so it implies the same line but there, and I think the Giants are a better team than Carolina, but I still like the Saints in this matchup, with the home game and a must-win game for them as well. But a player I'm gonna be looking at is gonna be Alvin Kamara. He's probably been the most consistent running back. He every single game he's had double-digit running backs besides, like, CMC, with that, but he's had at least 11 or more fantasy points in each of his games so far this year. He was suspended those first 3 games, but he's been the number 5 overall running back. He has a great fantasy season where a lot of people thought he was going to decline this week or decline this year. So he's really surprised a lot of people, and I like a home game against not the best defense in the Giants.
Maybe that those 3 games off actually helped him at this stage of his career, keep him fresh for later in the season, which is good for fantasy owners. I agree. He's looked really good. I I'm gonna say the Giants cover this game. They're gonna lose, but I say they cover that -6. That seems a little high for me, and I'll go with the under as well. I don't think there'll be a ton of points in this game. One guy I'm kind of intrigued by is Wan'Dale Robinson. You mentioned him on our waiver wire video this week, if I'm not mistaken, and he's kind of emerged as the go-to target in that passing game. He has at least 4 catches, 2 straight games, and 3 of his last 5. He had 6 receptions for 79 yards last week, which was his best game of the season. Tommy Cutlets is looking his way, and he's making plays. Robinson's a really talented receiver. He made a great catch along the sideline last week. I think he's going to get some work this week in this matchup. I also think Saquon Barkley's a great play as well. I think he's going to get a huge workload against a Saints team that has actually been leaky against the run lately. They've had some injuries at linebacker, which has really hurt them. So I look for Saquon to have a huge game as well. But if you're looking for a little deeper dive, Wan'Dale Robinson could be a decent play for fantasy owners. Next game, Logan, Texans 7-6 against the Titans 5-8. Texans reeling a little bit. CJ Stroud's in the concussion protocol. His status is up in the air right now. 38 for the over/under. Titans at home -3. So again, another game looks like a pick 'em. A lot of them are falling that way this week. It's a tough week to
Yeah.
pick these games, in my opinion. But what do you think the Titans win this one at home?
Yeah, I think the Titans do win this just because Houston is struggling with a bunch of injuries. As you mentioned, CJ Stroud's status is up in the air. Nico Collins also battling an injury. Tank Dell out for the season. So Houston's just reeling with the injuries right there. This is also a revenge game for DeAndre Hopkins against his former team, the Texans.
It's
So
true.
he's actually my player that I'm going to be going with against that. And he's looked great in the last couple of weeks. Last week he had 25 fantasy points against Miami in that game that you were talking about. But yeah, he's gonna be my play this week, a home game against his former team.
Yeah, I think the Titans win at home as well. I really think Mike Vrabel's done a great job coaching that team because I don't think they're very good, but he keeps them in every game. There've been a lot of close games. They could be in the playoff hunt if they had a couple more breaks go their way. Unfortunately, they haven't, but he still has them playing pretty well. I like them at home. I'll say the over for the over/under, though, not a huge number, 38. So I think it kind of just depends on CJ Stroud. If he ends up not playing, I could see it being under that. But if he does play, I'd say over for sure. Either way, I like the Titans to win and cover that. I like Chigakonkwu at tight end for the Titans this week. So he isn't really having that breakout season many hoped he would have, but he still has a pretty good weekly floor. He has at least 3 receptions, 3 straight games, and 6 of his last 7. He had a season high, tied a season high with 5 catches last week. Been getting more looks. Houston also has been awful against the tight end this year. They allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to tight ends. So I think Okonkwo is a good play in this matchup. I've mentioned a lot of tight ends, which is something I normally don't do, but it seems like a lot of these guys are set up for good games this week. So looking for some tight ends. I think there's some guys out there that could help in week 15. All right, next game, Logan. Chiefs 8-5 at the Patriots 3-10. The line on this one is I don't.
Yeah, last I saw was
Oh,
8.5.
37 is the over under, and the line is +8 for the Patriots. Sorry, I didn't see it right away, but not a high scoring game considering it's the Chiefs, but uh, Patriots are really home dogs, +8. Chiefs aren't
Yeah.
exactly lighting it up. You still think Chiefs can cover that?
I still think I am gonna go with the Chiefs to cover that. I think we're gonna find out a lot about this Chiefs team for this year of how they come out after that last game. Very emotional ending for them last week, so we're gonna see a lot of how that team reacts to it. But I do think they go out and cover 8.5 as they've got more to play for. The
Yeah,
Patriots.
for sure. Who do you like as your playoff winner in this
Yeah,
one?
so I'm gonna go with Rashee Rice as my player. He's really been that number one wide receiver for the Chiefs. When you look at his last 3 games, 24, 14, and 20. And they've been getting him tons of targets. He has 29 targets in the last 3 games. So he's really stepped up into that wide receiver one role, and I think he's going to have a huge impact on the leagues going into the playoffs as they have a great playoff stretch where they play the Patriots, the Raiders, and then the Bengals. So I think they've got a really good upcoming stretch with that.
Maybe Patrick Mahomes can finally get going for fantasy owners because he's been a bust,
Yeah,
quite
he is.
frankly.
He has
The
struggled for
price tag
sure.
you paid to get him, I mean, you can't blame him for a lot of their issues, a lot of drop passes, penalties, you name it. I don't really blame Mahomes for all the wrong things going on in Kansas City, but it's not helping his fantasy numbers, which is unfortunate because you paid a high price tag to get him, and he's not paying off, unfortunately. All right, so I do think the Chiefs, I agree. I think they cover that big number, and I'll go with the over. I think some points will be scored. And I got to give a shout out. I cannot remember who it was, Logan, but on our uh, show last week, someone mentioned the Chiefs have allowed the most receiving yards to running backs.
Yes, I do
And
remember that.
James Cook had 5 catches for 83 yards against them last week, if I'm not mistaken. So great point to that person out there, whoever it was. So shout out to you. Sorry, I don't remember who it was. But because of that, one of the reasons is I'm picking this player, and that's Ezekiel Elliott. He should get another start this week. He actually had 7 catches last week in his game. So if he can duplicate that against the Chiefs, who struggle against stopping running backs catching the ball, I think you could have another really big game. Chiefs have uh, allowed some big games to running backs this year as well. I thought Elliott looked great last week in his start. He had 29 total touches in that game. He has 13 plus fantasy points 2 straight games. So I think Elliott's actually a really good play this week. Never thought I'd be saying that at this time of the year, but that's the way it's fallen with Ramondre Stevenson out. All right, Logan, we've got a couple questions now in the chat again. So we have Chig Okonkwo or Taysom Hill in a tight end premium league. I actually like Okonkwo for the reasons I mentioned, but any thoughts for
Yeah, I
you?
kinda think I agree with you. I think Taysom Hill's injury, it kinda depends how fully healthy he is. If he's not fully healthy, I don't think they'll utilize him as much as they normally have. With that, I know he's questionable, but it's leaning towards he will play, so I think I'm still gonna go with Chig Okonkwo with that.
Yeah, I agree. I just think you're taking a risk with Hill. He's banged up. Who knows how much he plays? I know they're all banged up too, though. The Saints are banged up all over the place. So
Yeah.
if he plays and he's healthy, he could get a lot of looks, but still, he's a risk. I think his floor is going to be lower than Chiga Conquer, so I probably lean his way. Another good question. The next one is start 3, so you have to bench one of these guys: Puka Nakua, Chris Olave, Justin Jefferson, or Jalen Waddle. Who are you benching out of that group? Whew.
It's hard to bench one out of that group. But if I had to go with one, I would probably bench Olave. Um, I'm gonna talk about Nakua in a little bit. I just love, the Rams matchup this week against Washington. Also, Justin Jefferson has a great matchup as well against Cincinnati, and then again, with Tyreek Hill a little bit banged up, Waddles might have wide receiver 1 option, in Miami this week.
Yeah, it's a close call. I actually might lean Olave. Waddle, like you mentioned, could get more looks with Hill banged up, and he actually had a 100-yard game against the Jets just a few weeks ago. Although their pass defense, I think, is pretty good. I might lean Olave, but I think it's between Olave and Waddle personally. I think
Yeah, I agree.
Jefferson
I
and
think
Nakua.
Nakua and Jefferson are must starts
Yeah,
with their matchups this week.
kudos to you for having a great receiver room, though. Because I mean, that's some great options to choose from each week. So good work there. But tough decision for this week. Logan and I both think maybe Olave, but it's a close call between Olave and Waddle. Good luck. All right, next game, Logan, is the 49ers 10-3 at the Cardinals 3-10, kind of polar opposite teams at this point. 49ers really rolling. They are plus 12 and a half is the Cardinals at home, 48 for the over-under. So a huge over-under and a huge line in favor of the 49ers. You think the 49ers cover that?
You would think so, but the thing with them is they might overlook this game. I feel like this is a very easy game where you can just overlook the Cardinals and say this is going to be a freebie win, and Cardinals get a touchdown at the end and make it by 10 or something like that. So I can definitely see Arizona covering this game. I think I would lean towards that, even though I would be staying away from that. Um, with 48 as the over under is pretty high for me to trust with Arizona's offense with that. So I do think I'm going to stay with that. But my player is James Conner as the player I'm going to be looking at in this game, and he has actually been really good this year on yards per carry. So every single game he's had more than 4 yards per carry on the season. Last week or against week 13, he had a bye last week, but he had 25 carries, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. Game before that, he started to get a little bit going in receiving. He had 4 receptions before that. So that's where he's really struggled so far this year is with receptions, but he started to get that going a little bit, and he's doing great on the ground.
So I think the 49ers cover that, even though it's a huge number and it's really scary. But like you, I might just stay away from it altogether. That's just such a big number. Like you said, late touchdown, one way or the other, could really flip things. So that scares me. I'm going with the under as well. Although I do think some points will be scored. It worries me that Cardinals offense a little bit. 49ers defense is playing better too lately. But even with that said, as I mentioned before, game script matters. I think the Cardinals are playing from behind, throwing a lot. I love Trey McBride this week. I think he's a top 5 fantasy tight end. 8 receptions each of his last 2 games, at least 7 receptions, 3 or 4 games. He has 3 games this season with 20 plus fantasy points. I think he's going to get a ton of targets in this one, and I like him a lot to produce big. So I think McBride is a really good play. Another question, Logan, who should I start? Nico if he plays or Ty Chandler if Madison is out? I get 0.2 points per carry and extra points for first down. So that's a little bit of a different format than your normal league there. What do you think?
It is. I think that actually might make me go Ty Chandler with that 2.2 points per carry. So I think we're going to be looking at about 15 carries or so for Ty Chandler. So that's an extra 3 points. And then it comes down to first downs with that. But I think Ty Chandler does get a lot of work against Minnesota this week if Madison is out. So I think I'm going to go with him. I think he's
I
also a good floor play as well.
I do like Ty Chandler this week, as I mentioned earlier, because I think they're going to kind of lean on the run, maybe a little more with Nick Mullins as their QB. But if Nico plays, I really have a hard time sitting him personally, just because I think his ceiling's so high. So I probably lean him if he plays, but I'm not sure he plays at this point. He hasn't practiced yet. He left that game early. It's a calf injury, which is something he had earlier this year and actually knocked him out of a game as well. So I think he sits. So it might make your decision a lot easier. But for me personally, I might lean Collins. It's a really close call, though, just because of your format where you get 0.2 points per carry. That's not a lot, but still, it could get you a couple more points than some of those normal leagues. So every point matters for sure. All right, Logan, next game. Commanders 4-9 at the Rams 6-7. Rams playing better football right now. And they're at home. They're 6.5-point favorites. Over under. This is the highest one of the week. Actually, it ties. There's another one with this exact same over under. It's 50.5. So it's a huge number here. You think it goes over that? That's a lot of points.
I don't know about the over under, but I think my favorite play of the week is going to be Rams minus 6.5. With that, I think Washington's defense is just free falling right now, and
Yep.
Rams offense are fully healthy and they're clicking. They went to overtime at Baltimore last week, and now you got a home game against Washington, who has really struggled. I'm all for the Rams minus 6.5, so that's my favorite play.
All right.
I think, and player I'm looking at is Matthew Stafford. As I mentioned, secondary is terrible for Washington. The last couple of weeks, I'm going to go ahead and pull up their points against, but they gave up 45 points to the Dolphins, 45 points to the Cowboys, 31 to the Giants, 29 to the Seahawks, 17 to Patriots, 38 to the Eagles. So that is a bunch of points that they are giving up. And again, they traded away Sweat and Chase Young a couple weeks ago. So now their two key pieces gone from that defense. So I'm all over Matthew Stafford this weekend. Anyone on that Rams offense.
So I agree. You actually took my player. Matthew Stafford was my guy. I think the Rams cover. I'll go with the over. That's a huge number, but the Commanders can score too. So I like a lot of points in this game. And like you said, Matthew Stafford, he's been great lately. He is fourth overall in fantasy quarterback scoring his last 3 games. I had to kind of do a double take there. In 2 of those games against the Browns and Ravens. So those are 2 of the best pass defenses in football. And he's produced big numbers. Commanders dead last against the pass, and they allow the second most fantasy points to QB. So I think Stafford and that passing game is a huge week. Kupp, Nakua, play them all. I think they're going to have huge weeks this week. All right, a couple more questions, Logan. Some of them flying in now. So we got Ridley, likely JSN, Waddle for the flex spot, and then Foreman or a chain for his, I guess, second running back spot maybe. So Ridley, likely JSN,
So I
Waddle.
think I'm going to go a chain for sure if he's healthy. I think he
Agreed.
is questionable. But I think that's an easy one with that. And then for that flex spot, it's tough. I think it's between Ridley or Waddle with that. I just can't go with likely, even though he did have a good game last week. But I think I would go Waddle, actually.
So I have Waddle 24th in my receiver rankings this week, Ridley 25th. So right
Yeah.
next to each other. I think that's who it comes down to. I agree with you with the chain. I just think he has a higher ceiling because he catches the ball. Foreman doesn't catch the ball, kind of a touchdown dependent big fantasy performer. So if he doesn't score a touchdown, his numbers are probably going to be pretty mediocre. And Chain has more ability for that big game. So I like him. I probably go Waddle over Ridley, but it's a really close call. I think you can make a case either way, but I'm leaning Waddle in that one. So good question, though. Good luck to you, Jonathan, in your game. Another Ridley one. Let's just jump right into that next one. Brandon Cooks or Ridley? Again, another Ridley question. Do you like Brandon Cooks over him? Could be a high-scoring
It's
game.
close. So I like Cooks' matchup a lot more. I will state that. So that's actually our next game. It's a very high over-under at 50.5. With that, I think it's tough because I mean, for Ridley, you're home against Baltimore. You got a little bit better defense with that, but he also is going to be that number one option, or should be that number one offense in that offense where they have kind of really mixed around who got the ball after Kirk has been gone. Evan Ingram's been getting a lot of targets. Zay Jones has been getting a lot of targets, so he hasn't really stepped up into that number one wide receiver role with that. Where Cooks, he's had a couple games where he's had touchdowns in some big games, but I still think I'm going to go with Ridley over Cooks.
I agree. I think it's a close call as well. Ridley can be boom or bust, but the thing that encouraged me last week, Ridley had 13 targets. I know he only caught 4 of those, but that's a lot of targets. He had 8 the previous game, so that's 21 targets his last 2 games. I think they're going to have to score some points if they want to beat the Ravens, so I'd lean Ridley here. It's a close call, though, so good luck to you in your game this week. Excellence. All right, next game, like you mentioned, this is another big one. Cowboys 10-3 at the Bills 7-6. Bills coming off a huge win there against the Chiefs. 50.5 for the over-under, -2 for the Bills here at home. So usually it's that implied -3. So it seems like if it's a neutral site, Cowboys are favored by 1. So do you think the Cowboys go on the road and win this one?
It's tough. This is a huge game for both sides. So you get the division on the line for the Cowboys, but then Buffalo's fighting for that playoff spot. I do think I think I'm going to lean towards Buffalo, though. I think this is the game of the week. I think there's going to be a lot of people watching this game as you get two good. A lot of fans on both sides. We'll put it
Yeah,
that way.
for sure.
With that, so I do think this is going to be the game of the week that everyone's going to be watching. So much on the line for both sides. Guy I'm going to be looking at though is Jake Ferguson. Though he's really been pretty solid as a tight end.
Yeah.
So his last couple of games, he has over 70 yards in back-to-back games. 6 receptions, 5 receptions. He also has a touchdown with that, 5 touchdowns on the year. So I'm going to be going with Jake Ferguson as my play with that, but I am going to go with Buffalo to win at home.
Yeah, this is another close call. I might go with the Cowboys. They're playing really well. I know that they can struggle at times against good teams, especially on the road. It's always been kind of their bugaboo of late, but I still think the Cowboys get it done. They're playing really good on both sides of the ball, and I like the under as well. It's a huge point total. I think there'll be points scored. That's a big point total. And both these defenses have been a little better lately. Also, the Cowboys have been good all year, but the Bills have played a little better defensively of late. Also, I like Tony Pollard a lot. He finally has it going. He's finally living up to his draft status where he was a late first round pick in most leagues. He has 16 plus fantasy points, 4 straight games. He has at least 4 receptions, 3 of those 4 games. So that really helps him, helps his fantasy floor. And I think he keeps it going this week against Buffalo. They allow the 13th most fantasy points to running backs. So I like Pollard to be the focal point maybe of the offense so we can get a lot of work. All right. So another question, Logan, is Stafford got Stafford and Fields. Would you go with Stafford over Fields? And would you play Likely over Ferguson? So I'm playing Stafford this week, and I'm playing Ferguson as well.
Yeah, I'm the exact same way. I think Stafford could be a top 5 fantasy quarterback this week
Yep.
with this matchup.
Agreed. And you just talked about how you like Ferguson. I do like Likely. I think he's still hit or miss compared to some of these other options. I know he had a huge game last week with 5 catches for 83 yards, but that was the first time all season he had more than 50 yards in a game. So Ferguson's been a lot more consistent in that offense. So I trust him more at this point. I lean his way. There's another really good question after that. Josh Palmer tonight or Hope Brian Robinson plays Saturday?
So I think I'm going to go with Josh Palmer just because I don't think Brian Robinson does play. He hasn't practiced yet, and that is coming off of a bye week. A lot to take in with that. I just don't think he will be up to speed in time with that. And Palmer tonight, you got Keenan Allen out of the lineup with that, so he could probably slots in as that number one wide receiver for the Chargers tonight.
Someone has to catch the ball for the Chargers, and
Yeah.
I think Palmer's probably the best bet, either him or Everett. So you're right. I don't think Robinson's going to play either. It's tough. These injuries make it hard, especially when you have a Thursday night game. It's a tough decision to make there, but I probably play it safe and go with Palmer, just because, like you said, they're hurting at receiver. Someone has to catch passes, and Robinson, I don't think is going to play either. All right, let's talk about this Ravens team. Next game, Ravens 10-3 at the Jags, 8-5. Another big game for playoff implications. It's a Sunday night game, 42.5 on the line, +3 for the Jags at home. You like Jags to win this one, or you think the Ravens keep their momentum
Yeah, I'm
going and
still going
take it?
with Baltimore in this game. A couple injuries on both sides of the ball, but both quarterbacks are still there, unlike a lot of teams in this league.
It's true.
But you got Christian Kirk, and then you got Mark Andrews out for both sides. But a guy I want to be looking at is going to be Zay Jones. He's just being so many targets. It's hard to pass up on that and slide him into your lineup. But last week he had 14 targets against Cleveland. He only had 5 receptions out of those 14 targets. So that's not as encouraging, but I love having wide receivers that get so many targets. So he's going to be my play in this matchup.
Yeah, it bodes well when they get a lot of looks. It just seems a matter of time before they have a big game and they're getting that many looks. I think the Ravens do win on the road. Jags, they just haven't really impressed me this year, despite their 8-5 record. They've been just kind of up and down. I thought they would be better, more consistent. And Lawrence isn't 100%. Ravens just seem to get it done every week. So I like them to win at home. I'll go with the over, though. I don't think that number is huge. I know the Ravens have a good defense, but the Jags can put up some points. I like Evan Ingram. I actually think he's the biggest benefactor of the Christian Kirk injury. I thought maybe it might be those receivers like Zay Jones and Parker Washington, but Ingram's the guy getting the looks. 12 targets last week, 11 catches. He has 20 receptions his last 2 games. I think the Jags could be playing from behind, having to throw the ball. So I think that bodes well for Ingram and Zay Jones, like you mentioned. Also, I think he could have a decent showing as well. All right, couple more questions, Logan. Do I bench Devontae for any of Waddle, Ridley, or JSN?
I don't think so. I think I have to start Devontae if he's playing.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I bench Devontae either, uh, especially for JSN. I just don't know if I trust him to have the monster game that Adams is capable of. All right, another question. Rocky has one. If Josh Jacobs doesn't play tonight, would you go with Aaron Jones or Kenneth Walker? Or should I pick up Brian Robinson or Devin Singletary to replace Jacobs, full PPR, and Chuba Hubbard's out there as well? I mean, here's my thoughts on Aaron Jones. I can't trust that guy at all. I know he could play this week, but you've seen what's happened with him this year. He hasn't really gotten a huge workload since week 1, and I
No,
have no faith in him. So I'm steering clear of him. I just think he scares me. I go with Kenneth Walker. I think he has the most potential out of that group. I know he's kind of splitting work with Charbonnet a little bit. Hubbard gets a lot of volume as well, but I just think Walker has the highest ceiling. So I probably lean him. I don't know about you.
I agree completely with everything you said there. After that first week where Jones picked up that hamstring injury, it's hard to go back to him with that. He's only had 1 game where he's had more than 13 carries since then. So it's
I
hard to
don't
trust
trust him.
him
I just
until you
don't
see
trust
that
him.
he has a fully healthy week. I don't think I can start him.
And
What
Walker
about
actually looks fairly healthy at this point. He made some good runs last week.
he did?
I know his numbers haven't been off the charts, but I just think he has the highest ceiling, so I lean him. All right, Logan, last game of the week could be a good one. Eagles 10-3 at the Seahawks 6-7. Seahawks need a win here on Monday night. Eagles kind of reeling a little bit. This 47.5 for the over/under, +4 for Seattle as well. So Seattle is a home dog. You think the Eagles get it done, or do you think Seattle? They got that 12th man. They play well at home.
They do, but I'm gonna go with the Eagles. I think they need a rebound, and this is a good week to rebound with that. A guy I'm gonna be looking at has really struggled the past 3 weeks, and that's DeAndre Swift. Fantasy point wise, he has 9, 4, and 3 in his last 3 games. But I really think they're going to turn towards the running game this week. They fell behind very early against Dallas. Same with San Francisco, so they're kind of forced into passing. with that. But I think they control this game and run the ball a lot more with Swift.
So you took my guy again, Logan. DeAndre Swift. Totally agree. I totally agree, though. They need to take some pressure off Jalen Hurts. They're not running the ball enough. Swift has fewer than 40 rushing yards each of his last 2 games. I know, like you mentioned, they got behind, so they kind of abandoned it, but it makes that offense click. When that running game's going and Swift is playing well like he was early in the season, that offense was electric. So I think they're going to make it a point to get him the ball early and often, and I think he's going to have a huge game this week. So if you're giving up on him after a couple down games, don't. I think he rebounds. I think the Eagles win on the road. Should be a good game, though. I think the Seahawks will stay in it, but the Eagles pull it out in the end. And I like the over. I think there'll be some points scored. Neither of these defenses are very good. 47.5 is a pretty big number, but still, I could see this being a 30-21 game, 30-23 or something along those lines. So going with the Eagles and DeAndre Swift. Both Logan and I like him to rebound in a big way. All right, Logan, last question. Is Jalen Guyton worth a dart throw?
If you have absolutely no other options, then maybe, but I think there's a lot better options that you have on the waiver wire that you can pick up.
Yeah, I agree. He's had a couple, one decent showing, 4 catches, 41 yards in week 10, but I don't know. I don't really trust him. Quentin Johnston or Josh Palmer for me, or Gerald Everett in that passing game. I think they're the guys that are going to get leaned on the most. I mean, if you want to maybe take a chance in DFS and you want to go really cheap on a receiver, I could maybe do that
Yeah.
with Guyton, but in my standard leagues, I can't do it. Sorry.
Yep. Agreed.
All right, Logan, great show today. Got through all the games, had a lot of great questions from our viewers out there. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Good luck to everybody in their playoffs. Good luck to you as well, Logan. So should be a fun week. I'm looking forward to the games. As we mentioned, a lot of these games are really close.
Yeah,
Should be
lots of
fun to
spreads
watch.
right around that 3 mark.
Yeah, and we get to watch football all weekend, which is a lot of fun as well. You get Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. More football, the better, in my opinion.
Yep, for sure. I love those Saturday games.
Should be great. All right. Thanks again, Logan, for joining me. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody out there for watching. Good luck in all those Week 15 games. This has been Jeff Paur with Real Time Fantasy Sports. Have a great day, everyone.